Hello, everybody. We're going to be waiting for a few minutes before I get everybody, as much as I can, people to jump onto the live feed and start talking about yesterday's vote and how we're going to move towards ending qualified immunity in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Just give it a few more moments. Very important vote for me. And very important that the public knows exactly what's going on with this specific vote. Of course, my deepest pleasure to have so much interest in moving forward in this direction. So we'll give it a few more moments and we'll get started. All right. I think we can get started. So welcome, everybody. My name is State Delegate Ibrahim Samirah. Very simply put, being biracial, Afro-Arab with very lived experiences, with qualified immunity being used against my family, as someone who does not pass for being biracial, Afro-Arab, but is nonetheless very proud and attached to it. I'm so happy to know that I have so much support in my push for justice through eliminating qualified immunity. For those that don't know me, I want you to know that my constituents know me well, and that's why what I'm about to explain to you would come as no surprise to the large majority of my constituents. In the last 24 hours, I've been called a performer, a phony. I've been stripped of my blackness that you can't see or feel, most likely. I've been called a liar. I've been called a fake. I've been torn apart, and I had to hold it together while in the middle of work on very high need working class people that need my help at the community dental clinic I work at as a dentist. Literally yesterday, left work at 8:30, got home at 9:30. I felt like I needed to do something about all of this, but it was too late, so we had to wait till today. My staff, of course, taken off for the weekend for Labor Day weekend. They work really hard for you and for all Virginians, and I really try to stay conscious of that and not overwork them. Getting right to it. Removing qualified immunity without also preventing local law enforcement agencies from using taxes collected from all Virginians to protect law enforcement and lawsuits only makes the systemic problems of policing at the local level worse. Virginia's local law enforcement that is hired by elected officials of localities, counties, cities, and towns, or run by elected officials like sheriffs, will not be facing the full financial repercussions caused by their systemically violent law enforcement accountability systems if they are allowed to use state funds to protect themselves. In the next few minutes, I'll explain what this fully means for low-income families and brown and black lives. First off, it means all Virginians will eventually have to pay for increased expenditures of law enforcement agencies from proceedings against bad actors of local law enforcement agencies that they never voted for, directly nor indirectly. This significantly reduces the positive effects of increased law enforcement accountability on low-income families, on brown and black lives, from the removal of qualified immunity. Second, we cannot fix this problem without divesting and reinvesting money away from law enforcement. In the last budget passed by my House colleagues, more money was appropriated to law enforcement than was in prior budgets. And that money should not be used to protect locally hired law enforcement. Lastly, yes, removing qualified immunity will lead to more bad actors being prosecuted alongside their systemically bad law enforcement agencies. But white supremacy thrives on law enforcement because it's an ideology that is inscribed into law enforcement, into every facet of law enforcement. With white supremacy being so ingrained for over 400 years in the systems of law enforcement, we cannot continue to rely on law enforcement to bring justice to lower income families and brown and black lives. We need more focus on mental health issues, food insecurity, and family disputes in lower income and brown and black communities. Addressing systemic public health concerns of those most affected by police brutality cannot continuously take a back seat to law enforcement spending. Even when science tells us that it's a better way of fighting crime than policing. And that needs to change immediately. So just to make clear again, removing qualified immunity without also preventing law enforcement agencies on a local level from using taxes collected from all Virginians to protect law enforcement in lawsuits only makes the systemic problems of policing at the local level worse. Virginia's local law enforcement that is hired by elected officials of counties, cities, and towns, or run by elected officials like sheriffs, will not be facing the full financial repercussions caused by their systemically violent law enforcement accountability systems if they are allowed to use state funds to protect themselves. Now, in the next couple minutes, I'll explain what happened yesterday. Legislation that was presented in the Virginia House of Delegates, which I am a member of, was passed with my casting vote. A strong police and justice reform legislative package that would establish, among many other reforms, a blanket prohibition on chokeholds and create criminal penalties for officers who fail to intervene in another law enforcement official's unlawful use of force was agreed to. The bills, which drew strong opposition from Republican delegates, passed with my party's full support. However, one of the 12 proposed delegates that I support did not pass. That bill was to remove qualified immunity from our justice system. Qualified immunity protects officers from lawsuits alleging misconduct. The legislation, with or without my vote of support for it, was known prior to its vote taking place to be on a pathway to failing to pass the House of Delegates with a majority vote. Let me repeat this in another way. There were 4 Democratic colleagues of mine that, prior to the vote taking place, were firmly no votes on eliminating qualified immunity, alongside 3 other Democratic colleagues of mine that were firm votes in abstention, meaning that they weren't going to take a position on yes or no, that also were firm prior to the vote taking place. So, again, the legislation to eliminate qualified immunity, with or without my vote of support for it, was known prior to its vote taking place to be on a pathway to failing to pass the House with a majority vote. Knowing that it would fail to receive a majority even with my support, and being a legislator known to the public through my votes to have never voted against a proposed progressive police and justice reform legislation of any kind. Let me repeat that. I have never voted against a proposed progressive police and justice reform legislation of any kind. And you can obsessively check my voting record on that. I sought to use my hard-earned reputation and vote to preserve the ability to get the vote reconsidered if it had failed as predicted. Under the rules of the Virginia House of Delegates, specifically Rule 70, a member can motion for a legislation to be reconsidered by the full membership of the House if they had voted on what is called the prevailing side. I had informed my House Democratic Caucus of my intent to vote no so that I can be on the prevailing side. And this predictably failed to pass vote outcome that I knew of prior. As predicted, the legislation to end qualified immunity died. Again, with or without my vote of support for ending the qualified immunity. It was a 49-47 vote. Even a tie vote would have killed the bill. And so, as I had planned to do in the case of this failure, I made sure I would be in a position to be able to reintroduce the legislation on ending qualified immunity one more time by technically being on the prevailing side. So now, under the rules of the House of Delegates, I am allowed to motion to bring the legislation back for reconsideration by the full body. And I hope you trust me to be able to do something big with that. In my opinion, the bill failed to have a majority of votes in the House of Delegates with or without my vote of support because it was not as strong as it could be. The legislation had been watered down during committee work. Given the need for compromise to be able to pass the legislation through the House of Delegates, I will be proposing an amendment to the legislation that would make it illegal for all law enforcement agencies that are not under the direct supervision of the Commonwealth of Virginia to use state funds in legal proceedings that protect law enforcement in legal proceedings of any kind, whether it be insurance premiums or actual proceedings themselves. Because now law enforcement, if the bill were to pass, would be forced to get insurance to protect themselves against their own misconduct rather than systemically changing the way they do things. It is my hope that after the passage of my amendment to the qualified immunity legislation, that the bill will have enough power to make it into law and be signed by the governor. I will be ending the video here, but I hope that the goodwill is there. I need you to join in my efforts. There's a link to join in the efforts. The link is Samirah, 4delegate.com/join. Again, that's my last name, 4delegate.com/join. And I hope you go there to sign up so that we know that you care about ending qualified immunity, so that we can get you to be mobilized with us to push for this bill to actually pass in as strong of a fashion as possible. Thank you so very much.